You didn't need to stop.
Well, no, I sound really like silly. Like
She doesn't want.
I'm just overwhelmed.
You make her
Interesting,
overwhelmed.
isn't it? Interesting. So all the notes are on Moodle, if you don't already know that. Let's just now see. Has anybody studied semiotics before? You have, so you'll be the classroom expert. I can.
This is actually something
You
actually
can
properly
assist.
studied.
You're going to assist me.
Mhm.
If I get lost, I'm just going to say over to you now.
Oh dear.
Just waiting for Jerry, so a couple of minutes. We'll be here.
Can I ask you a little question?
Yeah, I'll give you a little answer.
Nothing.
So next time we see you is Wednesday, I believe.
I know, it's a long time, isn't it?
I know. And I was wondering, because I've been thinking about the essay questions, and so I'm quite interested in question number 4. So will I be able to bring in the 2 examples already and just check with you? Maybe.
Yeah, look, I was going to explain this week, so I can mention it now.
Yes.
The deadline for your essay is what, the 20th?
It's like, oh, when is it? Oh, I forgot to ask you.
Is it the 20th of November?
The other one is
I
Tuesday
think it's the 20th.
for this class.
So what happens is that
Yeah, Tuesday.
today, this week is week 4. So it's basically you've got 4 weeks, I think 4 weeks.
Yes.
So what I generally do, hi Jerry.
Hi everybody.
What I generally do is I offer each of you an individual tutorial, roughly a week, maybe 2 weeks before the submission date, in which we go over in detail what your plan is, which question you want to answer, and so on. So that question would be appropriate for then. Happy to try to answer your question before then, but just so that you know. Okay, so we'll discuss, I'm not going to discuss it in detail now, but it's basically, I think I may have mentioned it to you before, between 11 and 2 on a Monday I have a room booked. So if you're free any time between 11 and 2 on a Monday, and I think we'll try to agree, or be probably for 2 weeks.
Okay.
So either probably week 5
Next
and
week,
maybe week 7.
after reading.
So the Monday before reading week, which I believe is next week, and the one after.
Okay.
So you can make a booking. You can just,
Amazing.
yeah, all right. So, but we'll do it in fact, I'll probably maybe even give you a sign-up sheet this week, and everybody can, check.
Perfect.
All
What
right.
times did you
And-
say?
Pardon?
What times did you?
It's going to be between 11 and 2.
Perfect.
I'm hoping that will accommodate most
So we
people.
all have time, yeah.
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 And also, as Jerry knows, I give very detailed guidance notes about how to answer the question, especially seeing as this is your first academic media assignment. So Jerry, me, you'll get so much help, really, you really will. So hopefully that answers your question. So now we can start. We're talking, this is the second week, about advertising, and today we're going into arguably a bit more deep. Well, first of all, we're looking at photographic ads, primarily here, but also we're going in a bit more depth about how to look at an ad like this and analyse what's happening visually in terms of ideology and myth and some other words that I'm about to teach you. So this is what I'm going to be drawing on now, theoretically, is primarily the work of Roland Barthes, the famous French cultural semiotician. Yeah? So, semiotics, which can be applied to all media, but is often applied to news and advertising, is the study of signs, visual signs, photographic signs, symbols, and verbal word signs. It's not just words that we're going to analyse here, right? Now, the first thing to understand is this word sign that Barthes uses. A sign, remember, it can be visual or verbal or linguistic, is composed of two key aspects, components. A signifier and a signified. Okay, and I can demonstrate this, I can exemplify it with a word or a picture. So, well, I'll give you lots of examples in a moment, but let's just start by, let's just start by considering words as signifiers. So, what makes your learning of English interesting, or one of the things that makes it interesting, is that it's not just that you're learning to speak and use a foreign language, you're learning a different sign system. Okay? So, every word in your first language, has a sound, doesn't it? So, often the way I don't know why I always think of dogs, but the word dog, because most of you are Chinese, and that's so I'm going to play to the popular. The Chinese word is go, right? Pronunciation? Go, right? Now, Jerry, did you know the Chinese word for go? For dog?
For go.
Did you know? Did you know this word?
I did. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
So give us. All right.
Only
Imagine that Jerry didn't know the word.
Yeah, I didn't know.
Just
the word.
imagine
Sorry,
that.
I didn't.
Thank you. That's better. So, for him, it's just a sound. He hears Chinese. He hears the word go. He doesn't think dog. In Chinese culture, go is a signifier of the animal. I'm not going to draw the picture because I don't feel very good at drawing pictures right now, and you're going to laugh. Okay, but you know what a dog looks like, right? So a signifier is just the sound that creates the meaning. A signifier has no meaning. The fact that what other languages are represented here? Russian word.
For dog?
Yeah.
Sabaka.
Sabaka.
Yes.
right? It could be anything in theory, in any language, right? It's a signifier, yeah? Every language has different signifiers for the same, or arguably the same, signified. The signified is the meaning, yeah? The signifier is the sound or the image, or the image. So, a blue tree, right? Yeah? That signifies tree, but what does, well, in a way I shouldn't be talking about it, I should just be relying on the image. Does that look like a tree to you? Yeah? Okay, so just without using words, in theory, I didn't do it, but in theory, I draw a picture, and the picture signifies in your mind, you get a meaning of a tree, right, from a picture, yeah? This is interesting how language develops, isn't it? Because in Chinese in particular, it's argued, and it seems historically true, that what makes Chinese different from English is that it started with pictures, didn't it?
Yeah.
Right, so that's interesting in terms of semiotic analysis. A really fundamental difference between Chinese and English. Yeah. So anyway, what Barth is theorizing is that every sign has a signifier and a signified. Yeah. You need both to get meaning. A signifier doesn't make sense by itself, right? And every language uses different signifiers for similar signifiers. We'll come back to David Beckham in a minute. So we're concerned with advertisements, right? We're concerned with that. So we want to know how ads create meaning. That's the central question here. Barth is borrowing from the father of linguistics, Ferdinand de Saussure. He is the father of semiotics. So Barth adapted semiotics, which came from Saussure, to analyse culture and media. He did not invent semiotics. Saussure invented semiotics. What I've just given you so far, signifier and signified sign, is semiotic theory that comes from Saussure. Saussure was Swiss.
How do you spell his name?
S-A, well, as you can see up there.
Oh, sorry.
Saussure. So, let's think, along with Barth, about what Saussure's assumptions are about meaning and how the media and culture and art creates meaning. Some of the essential assumptions of semiotics is that the world of things, people, situations, and so on is not meaningful by itself. Right? We need signifiers to create meaning. We need signifiers to signify, to create signifiers. Yeah? There is no meaning in the world. We need to translate. We need to mediate. Different cultures translate, mediate differently. That's part of the fun. But it's also part of the conflict. So, Barthesian and Saussurean assumptions are that meaning is a social and cultural product created through language and other signifying systems, visual signifying systems. Meanings are not in the world, like, remember we talked about objectivity. Objectivity assumes that meanings in the world. Meanings are given to the world through subjectivity. They are conferred on the world. Through political subjectivity, through cultural subjectivity. right? How you are understanding me is conditional on everything that you've learned in your cultural backgrounds. Yeah? I cannot understand, I cannot be where you are interpreting me. You're conferring meaning now, as we speak. Right? It's not the same meaning that I'm conferring. It's always in the middle, it's always negotiated. It's not fixed, meaning is not fixed. So all of this implies that language produces particular versions of reality. So what do we mean by language produces particular versions of reality? Okay. There are some words in some languages that are untranslatable. Why? Because that concept only exists in that particular language or culture. Right? This suggests that there is no universal reality, that language confers reality, it constructs reality. Right? I'm being very general so far before we come to advertising. But if we now bring in advertising, I'm going to argue, and Bart argues, that one of the main purposes of advertising is to confer capitalist ideological meaning on the world. To construct meaning, to sell not only, as we talked about last week, a product, but to sell capitalism itself, to sell desire, to make you want it. Right? That's a particular Western, I'm going to argue, cultural appropriation of meaning. Advertising is cultural. Right? There you have it. Signifier can be a word or an image, and it's also a concept, and together they produce a sign. Now this is really key because, as you know, as you've seen with the essay titles, one of the essay questions is a semiotic analysis. So if anybody wants to write an essay which is a semiotic analysis of an ad, it's really important that you understand the three levels of meaning that Barth talks about. So the first thing to understand is this, and we'll apply this in a moment to the David Becker map, so hopefully it will make some kind of sense. Signifiers are related to signifieds via codes or conventions. Cultural codes, national codes, linguistic codes. Everybody agrees that's the meaning, therefore it becomes truth. Yeah? Now, the easiest part to understand of meaning in terms of the three levels of meaning that Barth's talking about, denotation, connotation, and myth, is the most superficial level. Yeah? So obviously I've done a triangle here. The apex of the triangle at the top is what we're going to call denotation. Denotation is literal meaning. Yeah? So what that means is, it's a bit like, actually I think this is where Barth borrows Marxist ideas, and clearly Marx borrowed it from somewhere too. This is the idea of a tree. A tree is a tree, right? It's just a tree. For some people, and this is an excellent way of illustrating ideology, for a capitalist, I'm stereotyping a capitalist, a tree isn't just a tree. In fact, a tree is dead. A tree is capital. A tree is money. Yeah? A tree is wood. Yeah? That's a connotation. Okay? If you see a tree as, or even think about, and part of the reason I think unconsciously I'm using the word tree as an example, is the SOAS logo. Yeah? Why do you think the SOAS logo is a tree? What does a tree symbolize? The tree of
Growth, knowledge.
knowledge. So a tree connotes knowledge. It's growing. It's also environmental, isn't it, in that sense? Right? So a tree is just what you see out there. Or another way of looking at it is that a lot of people in a very alienated capitalist world only see trees as money. They don't see them as living beings. Yeah? Quite an interesting activist friend of mine called Derek Jensen actually says that in grammatical terms, you shouldn't describe a tree as it, you should describe it as he or she, because it's living. Language confers meaning. If you make a tree into it, you're taking away its livingness. Yeah? So connotation is the next, now what's interesting about connotation, it goes back to different cultural codes and it goes back to translation, is that in some cultures, a particular thing, object, has different connotations, right? Now, I suppose there's so many ways that you can illustrate this, but the first thing that's coming into my mind is to do with food. Because we talked about a dog, didn't we? Yeah? We talked about go sabaka. Now, most people in this country, if you eat meat, right? What kind of animals do you eat?
Pigs, cows.
Yeah? And we're able to eat them, aren't we? Because the way we confer meaning on them is object to be eaten. Would you eat a dog?
No.
Would you eat a horse?
Some people do, but no.
Exactly. These are different cultural conventions. It's all meat. Would you eat a human being?
No.
No. But we're also meat,
Yeah.
right? So, I'm not going to get into the racist kind of Koreans and Chinese eat dogs. Oops, I did. But also, there was a big scandal recently in the news about how, did you hear about how in British supermarket, very cheap kind of lasagna products, they found horse meat instead of beef.
Oh yeah.
And people were really, really, really angry, and and the media made people really angry, and you just think to yourself,
Wait a
why?
minute. Yeah.
It's not really rational, is it? But the reason it's not rational is because of the cultural codes of what's food, what's animal, what's a living creature. So this is where connotation comes in, right? Now, so here, let's just put D is the literal, it's the superficial, it's the most simple meaning. Connotation is cultural meaning, national meaning. And then right here at the bottom where it gets really tricky is what we call myth. Because myth is a kind of cultural reality, it's a cultural code that everybody believes in. So religion is a myth, isn't it? Or another example that springs to my mind is, it wasn't that long ago in human cultural terms that people thought that the world was flat. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Now we say it's a myth. Why do we say it's a myth? Because meaning has changed since then. We know it's round because science and so on has proved it. So a myth is and there are many, believe it or not, I'm sure you do, there are many things that we believe in today that in the future, if we have any ancestors in the future, sorry to have to say, if there are any, they'll think, they were crazy, they believed in Donald Trump, or whatever, the myth. Yeah? So a myth is something that a lot of people believe in, but it's not actually true. It's natural. Okay? And again, this is where ideology comes in. Because the whole process of ideology is to make something that's not true, something that's fake, into reality, to make it look normal and natural. So, let's go back to this lovely picture. Sorry, wrong file. Try again. Alright, so we're going to analyse together this ad. And the reason I've chosen this ad, because it's like a cliche. It's got so many of the cultural myths, Western advertising, commercial, ideological, gendered myths. right? So, tell me what it's advertising. Perfume. So the denotation is perfume.
Yeah.
Can we agree on that?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's actually his and her. One of them is aftershave. You can't, man doesn't wear perfume, right? Come on. It's got to be called something different. It needs a different signifier, right? That's gendered. That's myth right there. We're straight into myth, yeah? A woman wears perfume, a man wears aftershave, right? That's myth. That's how myth works, right? The myth of the difference between men and women, maybe. We'll come back to that. Okay, so we all agree it's selling perfume and aftershave. But it's selling a whole lot more than that, isn't it? Look at the image. What's the image signifying in terms of what's the body language? Just describe it. I mean, imagine you're describing this scene to someone who's blind. What does it look like?
The man is looking directly at the camera as he, is fondling the lady.
Good
basically.
word, fondling. Good, that's the correct word. And she's looking away, so he's looking into the camera.
Because he's
Yeah?
in charge.
Because he's in charge. Because he's saying, look guys, this is what can happen. Right?
Spy my perfume.
Yeah? And yeah, he's active. He's active because he's fondling her and she's just kind of
She's
being
quiet.
cradled in his, and he's kind of almost winking at us, I would say. It's almost winking. And so in terms of the fact that he's looking at us, this is where we start to get into connotation, and we're going to talk about the myth too. This is called the gaze. And we'll come back to this later when we use feminist psychoanalysis to analyse films. This is a male gaze, yes? This is normalising the look, the objectification of women. I am holding a beautiful woman. How do you think I got her? It's kind of like, it's crazy to actually point it out, but it's kind of like, you need to buy this, guys. This is a high quality product. This is going to help you. It's also, now let's try and illustrate a little bit more of myth and ideology. Okay? Do you remember when I showed you the clip from They Live, and there was a picture of a woman in a bikini on a beach, and it said, when he put his sunglasses on, it said, marry and reproduce. Isn't this the same?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
A real life couple, yeah? Right? So it's actually selling heterosexual, young, white, good-looking, successful couples. It's encouraging young people, young men to identify with David Beckham, and presumably young women to identify with Victoria Beckham. Yeah? Identification, psychoanalysis, an emotional attachment to the image. Right? Another myth. What culture are they from?
English, white.
They're English, they're white, they're Western. Is that the only culture that has beautiful people in it?
No.
But if you look at advertising ideology, you'd think so, wouldn't you? So it's promoting the myth of white beauty. It's racist, if you like. You could even go that far. Anything else that strikes you as being any other connotations or myth in this particular image? Can you see why the advertisers selected this image? Why did they choose it?
Well, it's already called, the perfume's called
Intimately Beckham.
So the word intimate, it looks like an intimate setting, the lighting is dark, it's also referring to other things, such as intimacy.
Sexual intimacy, isn't it? That's the word that you're looking for. Sexual intimacy. Now, you've introduced the word, something important here, because it's the words.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine an ad without words? If you just saw that, and this didn't have words on it, and you just saw this image, would it make sense?
No.
No. Okay. So it's very important in ads that the words provide what Roland Barthes calls anchorage. The words fix the interpretation. They articulate the ideology. Yeah? So the words are Beckham, brand, yeah? The brand Beckham, intimacy. Yeah? This is selling intimacy. This is how to be sexually intimate. This is what you have to do. This is how you have to look. Yeah? So ads without words, with those kinds of images, or any kind of images, would not make sense. They'd be more random. They'd be open to interpretation. The words are the political fixing of meaning, the ideological fixing of meaning. Remember, this whole lecture is called Understanding Ads, right? Understanding is an intellectual, rational process. Do you think that as a result of everything that I've just given you in the last half an hour, the next time you see an ad with David Beckham in it, you're going to think, oh, not for me? Is that going to work? No, because it's not intellectual. Yeah, it's emotional. It's the part of our brains that we can't control. That's what advertising activates. Yeah? So it's feeling ads, actually. It's not just understanding, it's feeling. Okay, so let's go back to this. So, myth is really tricky, guys. Ideology is already tricky. So I've gone to a little bit of trouble to try to find a good quotation that we can all understand and agree upon. So let's go through it slowly and carefully. Myth means things used as signs to communicate a social and political message about the world. The message always involves the distortion, that means the changing or forgetting of alternative messages. It fixes meaning. And often when we say it distorts alternative messages, alternative cultural messages, alternative sexual messages, not just heterosexual messages, yeah, for example. That ad is selling heterosexuality. It's not just selling intimately better. So that myth appears to be exclusively true. Also, it's easier to mythologize visually, isn't it? Yeah? There's something about images that are powerful in terms of how our brain interprets images. So don't forget that images have more mythological impact than words. Words arguably play a secondary role. The primary role of images is to mythologize, and words, then they fix, they anchor the meaning. But it's the image that has the power. Image. Image is not rational, is it? It's a feeling. We feel images. So, the message always involves the distortion or forgetting of alternative messages, so that myth appears to be exclusively true, rather than one of a number of different possible messages. That's in your reading pack, I think. That's Bignell is in the, I think it's Jonathan Bignell in the reading pack, so we'll be coming back to that in the seminars and lecture reviews. Now here's the tricky bit. What is the relationship? Students are always saying, what's the difference between myth and ideology? Right? Well, you're not going to like the answer. They're definitely connected, but this is the best differentiation I can come up with. Ideologies are ideas and representations that conceal or misrepresent reality. So capitalist ideology conceals or misrepresents non-capitalist reality, right? But from a structural perspective, let's say communist ideology, right, also misrepresents reality by concealing capitalist ideology. You see? So these are, an ideology is a set of sign systems that naturalizes a political positionality. If you naturalize capitalism, you're saying capitalism is natural and normal. If you naturalize communism, you're saying you're using ideology to say it's natural and normal. But the problem with ideology that Marx pointed out very well and very clearly is that the whole purpose of representing an ideology is to support a particular power structure. So the people that promote ideologies are the people who are most powerful because they benefit from the ideology. Capitalists, believe it or not, benefit from capitalism. Communists benefit from communism. Right? So they have a political interest in maintaining an ideology through the media, through culture, that says capitalism is good, communism is good. Right? Does that make sense? Let's move on. So, the distinction between the two concepts of myth and ideology is not always obvious. According to Bignell and for Barth, myth is a type of speech about social realities which supports ideology, so it doesn't disagree with ideology, by taking these realities outside of the area of political debate. So here's the first distinction. Ideology is pure politics. Myth is trying to look at truth outside of politics. It's trying to complicate things. It's a bit like the difference between structure and agency. Yeah? Structure is a very political way of understanding reality and power. Yeah? So, for example, contemporary ads, like the one we've just analysed with the Beckhams, are full of products for women which purport to prevent or reduce aging. That means they claim that these products reduce aging. The ads never provide reasons for this interest in concealing or camouflaging a perfectly natural process. In other words, getting older and looking older is normal and natural. Why do humans construct old age as something fearful and ugly and to be hidden? Yeah? Because ideologically, capitalism is not interested in old people. They're going to die. Young people have all those years of consumption ahead of them. You are a product. Old people are as undesirable in capitalist advertising discourse as poor people. You can't sell to them, or you can, but it's a limited market, it's a limited target market. So it constructs aging as a problem, and therefore you can create a false need in terms of cosmetics, in terms of products, that will help middle-aged women and older women try to conceal the signs of age, because you're creating the false reality that there's something shameful about being old. You shouldn't look old. You should always look young. Look at old celebrities, Hollywood female celebrities, and how the lengths that they go to look. Look at Madonna. She's 60 now. She looks great, but my God, has she? She's trying so hard not to look 60. Yeah, this is the ideology that advertising creates. Yeah. So the ads attempt to take the issue outside of political debate. So by not actually accepting that aging is a normal life process, you're trying to take you're trying to depoliticize it. You're trying to say it's nothing to do with politics. Yeah? nothing to do with politics. It's everything to do with politics. Yeah? And just as I've only just thought of this, I didn't plan this. There's a key cultural translation between Western culture and your Chinese and Korean cultures. In your cultures, thankfully, you still respect older people. In the West, capitalism is so advanced that the older people are often much less respected in society. They're undesirable. Even when your parents get old, you just put them in an old people's home. You don't look after them because they're objectified, they're alienated, they're marginalised, and they're marginalised because of consumer capitalism. You should be thankful that in your culture you haven't been so indoctrinated by advertising consumer culture that you're not putting your grandparents into homes yet, institutions, and sort of abandoning them. That's a good thing. But there's the cultural difference, the different connotation of old age in Eastern and Western culture. Yeah? Do you understand? That's another way of understanding it. So we would call these ideas mythical in that they obscure the fact that there is no rational reason for women to be more concerned with disguising their age than men. Why is it that men don't worry about looking old? Actually, they do a bit, but not so much. Because men in patriarchy, you're mature, you've got more power, you're actually you might not look young anymore, but that's, if a woman loses her looks, she's done in patriarchal society. Right? That's the ideology of gender. Right? That's a gendered construction. The myth supports ideology in two senses. Firstly, it suggests, along with related myths, that women's social value, this is back to the beginning of the course, remember I talked about objectivity and objectification, it's going to come up again and again. Women's social value lies primarily in their appearance, whilst men's value lies in what they do. That's implicit in the ad that I showed you. Victoria Beckham in David Beckham's arms. David Beckham is actively looking at us. He's communicating with us. He's active. She's passive. It's all there. That's why I chose it, to illustrate it. Secondly, the anxiety generated by the perpetuation of the myth supports a multi-million pound industry. Think of Love Island. It's the same thing. It's the same industry. Reality TV. Producing many expensive potions of highly questionable efficacy. It doesn't matter that most of the products that are being sold to reduce aging, anti-wrinkle creams, don't work. Because the desire has been created and people will gladly pay money for something that may not work, just in case it does work. So the myth supports both, as I said already, patriarchy, male hegemony, and capitalist ideology. So I hope, if you just keep thinking about that and rereading it yourselves, you'll understand two things. Myth and ideology are very connected, but they're not the same thing. I'm going to, got a little bit more to share with you. I'm going to show you a clip in a moment about Roland Barthes, and also I'll answer any questions that you may have. Just a kind of synopsis of how to analyse an ad for those, and we'll practice this in the seminars this week, and maybe if you want to do it for your essay. There are 6 key steps to analyse an ad, as we did with the Beckham's ad. First of all, you identify the signs, visual and linguistic, the denotation. You describe the ad. Describe it in as much detail. What is the ad literally doing? Yeah, superficially. Secondly, you see how the caption, the words, the text, helps us to fix, to anchor and understand the visual signs. What's the relationship between the words and the image? Thirdly, you start to talk about the connotative cultural meanings that you think are in the ad. Fourthly, you identify the myths. Gender, sexuality, power, and so on and so forth. Link the myth to the ideology. Examine how the meanings created by the ad are then transferred onto the advertised product. Okay? This is how modern post-Fordist advertising works. What's the ideology, what's the lifestyle, what's the product? Yeah? That's being sold to us. Okay, any questions? If you still feel a little bit kind of unsure about what ideology is and myth and what the differences are, actually that's completely normal. You know, I wouldn't. In fact, if you said to me, "I completely understand the difference now," I wouldn't believe you because it's too early, right? Just let it sit and think about it. Also, I'm not gonna lie to you. Roland Barthes is a French semiotician, so his very categoric way of understanding meaning is quite Western. Yeah, how you can break down and analyze meanings. That's a very Western way of looking at the world. So your resistance to understanding the difference between denotation, connotation, myth, and ideology might actually be a good resistance. It might be your own cultural resistance because, you know, Barthes is not outside of ideology himself. He's also creating new Western science systems. So that's where you come in. How you understand Barthes, how you understand semiotics is really important, is really key. You don't have to agree with his assumptions, but you can try to use them if you want to. Yeah? Okay, so just as a further explanation of some of his basic theories, let's just go to a very short clip. Again, it's Al Jazeera that has made this.
My writing better.
As a student, I like that it's free. It actually is correcting everything as I'm writing it.
Grammar errors, spelling errors. It even helps me find the right words to use.
I mean, here's an ad. Hopefully, every time you see an ad now, you're going to think, what's it doing? Right? Because that's how it works.
Use so I can say what I want to say.
It catches all those embarrassing little mistakes before I hit send.
I downloaded Grammarly around my freshman.
Switch on the TV. What do you see? The breaking news graphic, the scrolling text, the news presenter behind the desk. Read the signs, the hair, the makeup.
This clip is focusing not exclusively, but mainly on news. So we're talking about advertising, but there's still, as I said to you already, semiotic analysis can be used to describe all media. News is a very important part of the course that's coming up later. So there's nothing wrong in introducing Barthesian semiotic analysis that can be applied to advertising and news. So the fact that it's talking about news here does not mean you can't adapt it to advertising, okay? It's not exclusively about news.
The suit. What is this story?
Or you could be really clever and you could say news is a form of advertising. News is a form of cultural advertising. Of course.
About the rhythm of the words, numbers, colors. Why are these codes here? The music, the size of the letters. How do you feel? A news bulletin is a selection of signs. The flow of words, read of the autocue. The artifice of the presenter's cadence. The news voice. The gaze looking right at you, but through a lens. Visual stand-ins for credibility, authority, legitimacy. Rhetorical motifs constructing the biggest myth of all, that what we are watching is unmediated reality. This is what Roland Barthes would have.
So, what the myth of unmediated reality? News creates the myth of objectivity, doesn't it? It's a myth. It gives you everything that looks real, doesn't mean it is real. News is also a construction, just like advertising. Yeah? So, objectivity, even truth itself, is a construction.
The TV screen as a cultural text, and he would have unveiled its myths. Because to read symbols and signs, to interpret them, is the work of a semiotician. In the 1950s, Barth started.
I just want to make one theoretical point linking semiotics with what we said about the difference between structure and agency. Because the key word for Roland Barthes is interpret. So all meaning is interpreted. It's interpreted culturally, subjectively, according to your gender, your age, your religion, your sexuality. It's subjective, right? It's subjective. So he, like Stuart Hall, is more open to the idea of individual interpretation. Yeah? He's not a structuralist, but as a semiotician, he's open to the ideas of complex agency. He uses Marxist ideas, but he uses them in a complex way, right? Just like Stuart Hall. So there's a direct link, that's all I'm trying to say, is that there's a direct link between Barthes, semiotics, Stuart Hall, and agency. Yeah? And just like Stuart Hall, he wrote about popular culture.
Writing about popular culture. In his book Mythologies, he gathered multiple discordant subjects: food, horoscopes, religion, advertising, toys, photography, detergents. He saw these as elements of mass culture, imbued with ideology, providing society with the myths that once came from fables and epics. Barth said, the starting point of these reflections was usually a feeling of impatience at the sight of the net.
So advertising is impatient about naturalness. So what he's saying, to try and translate this, is that the impatience is how can we get a passive audience to engage immediately with capitalism. It's by feeding them ideas, feeding them desire, yeah? Making them impatient, making them more anxious, more insecure, making women more insecure about their looks. The more insecure you women in this class are, the more insecure you feel about your looks, the more powerful advertising will be, because advertising will give you the myth that you can improve your looks by consuming particular beauty products. Yeah? So it's impatient, that's what it needs, impatient. Yeah? Making you anxious. Demanding that you consume on an unconscious level.
With which newspapers, art, and common sense constantly dress up a reality which is undoubtedly determined by history. Barth didn't just spotlight the myths that surround us. He put back the curtain on their ideological premises. He warned us against taking all that surrounds us at face value.
So what he warned us about interpreting everything around us at face value. So meaning is not out there, it's in here. Do not just, what capitalism wants you to do is it only wants you to see everything at the level of denotation. Yeah? Only see literal meaning. Only see the surface. Never see behind the surface. So capitalism is always trying to trick you in that way.
The fonts in your daily newspaper, they don't just reflect the meaning, they add it, they change it. The framing of this shot, what's the history behind it? The selfie, the latest representation of the bourgeois individual. The stick, a seal of authenticity, of status. The subtitle, the voice as text. What could be more Barthesian?
The voice is text. Because the voice is live, isn't it? If you hear my voice now, it's live. But if you then, even just filming it, it's creating history. Yeah? So what Bart is getting you to think about, what is the relationship between voice, liveness, and history and text? Yeah? Because it's always the text that has to give the meaning, that fixes the meaning. Any questions before I let you go? It's quite a theoretical lecture today, so if you feel like you're scratching your head thinking, what the fuck's he talking about? Good, because it's the only way. But if you understand anything, then that's a really good thing. We'll talk more about it in the seminars on Wednesday. Yeah? Yeah. Okay? See, next week, the link with next week, when I talk about foreign correspondence, and this is my own work, what's really important to me as an academic brand, is how foreignness is constructed in the news. What is the foreign? Yeah? What's a foreign correspondent? Yeah? Why are British foreign correspondents not foreign? Why do they go to foreign places and tell Western British audiences that's what the foreign's like? That's colonialism, right?